On the night of April 14th, 1912, more than 2,200 people were sailing across the North Atlantic aboard the most famous ship ever built. Some were celebrating new beginnings. Some were returning home. Some dreamed of becoming rich in America. Children laughed in the corridors. Elegant dinners were being served beneath sparkling chandeliers. The orchestra played cheerful music as passengers talked late into the night. No one knew that before sunrise. Over 1,500 of them would be dead. Almost everyone knows how the Titanic ended. It struck an iceberg. It sank. People died. But that's only the beginning of the story. Because behind the disaster were acts of courage, loyalty, sacrifice, and mystery that Hollywood could never fully capture. This is the real story behind the Titanic. In 1912, crossing the Atlantic wasn't just travel. It was a symbol of status. Shipping companies competed to build bigger, grander, and more luxurious ocean liners. The White Star Line wanted to build something unlike anything the world had ever seen. Not the fastest ship, but the most comfortable. The result was Titanic. At nearly 270 meters long, she was the largest moving object humans had ever built. She had electric elevators, a heated swimming pool, a gymnasium, Turkish baths, fine restaurants, luxurious first-class suites that rivaled the finest hotels in Europe. Newspapers praised her as a masterpiece of engineering. Many people believed she represented the future. While the famous phrase, "Even God couldn't sink this ship," was probably never actually spoken, one thing is certain. People believed Titanic was incredibly safe. Perhaps a little too safe. On April 14th, the ship received several warnings from nearby vessels. They reported dangerous ice fields directly ahead. Some messages reached the bridge. Others were delayed or never treated with enough urgency. Meanwhile, passengers continued enjoying what seemed like another peaceful evening. At 11:40 p.m., everything changed. A lookout suddenly spotted a dark shape directly ahead. "Iceberg, right ahead!" The warning bell rang. The crew reacted immediately. The helm turned. The engines reversed. But a ship weighing more than 46,000 tons couldn't change direction in time. Instead of a violent collision, the iceberg brushed along Titanic's starboard side. Many passengers barely noticed. Some simply felt a slight vibration. One passenger later joked that it felt as if someone had dragged a giant finger along the side of the ship. But below the waterline, steel plates bent. Rivets popped apart. Freezing seawater rushed into multiple compartments. Titanic had been designed to survive with 4 flooded compartments. 6 had already been breached. The ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, quickly inspected the damage. His conclusion was devastating. Titanic would sink. There was no way to stop it. Captain Edward Smith gave the order to prepare the lifeboats. Then another terrible problem became clear. There weren't enough. Although Titanic carried more lifeboats than legally required at the time, there was space for only about half the people on board. No one believed a ship this large could actually sink. The regulations simply hadn't kept up with technology. To make matters worse, many passengers refused to board the first lifeboats. The ship still looked perfectly normal. Its lights were glowing. The engines were humming. The band was still playing. Some believed leaving the warm, brightly lit ship for a small wooden boat in the freezing darkness seemed far more dangerous. Several lifeboats were lowered only half full. Those empty seats would later become one of the greatest tragedies of the disaster. Just over 2.5 hours after striking the iceberg, the unimaginable happened. Titanic broke apart, then disappeared beneath the Atlantic Ocean. But while history remembers the ship, it should never forget the people, because in those final hours, ordinary men and women made extraordinary choices, and their stories are even more remarkable than the sinking itself. As panic slowly spread across the decks, one sound remained surprisingly constant: music. 8 musicians, led by violinist Wallace Hartley, continued performing while passengers rushed toward the lifeboats. No one ordered them to stay. They could have tried to save themselves. Instead, they chose to keep playing. Why? Perhaps to calm frightened families. Perhaps to prevent panic. Or perhaps because they believed it was simply their duty. Survivors later recalled hearing music drifting across the freezing night air even as the ship began tilting sharply toward the sea. Exactly what the final song was remains one of Titanic's greatest debates. Many believe it was the hymn Nearer, My God, to Thee. Others insist it was a different tune. We'll probably never know for certain. What we do know is that none of the musicians survived. Weeks later, Wallace Hartley's body was recovered from the ocean. His violin, discovered many years afterward and carefully authenticated, has since become one of the most treasured artifacts connected to the disaster. More than a century later, their final performance is still remembered as one of history's greatest acts of quiet courage. Deep below the decks, another group of heroes fought a battle that almost nobody ever saw. Titanic's engineering crew, around 25 engineers, electricians, firemen, and boiler workers remained inside the ship as freezing seawater flooded lower compartments. They knew exactly what was happening. Unlike many passengers, they understood the ship was dying. Yet instead of running for the lifeboats, they stayed at their posts. They kept the boilers running. They kept electricity flowing. They kept the lights shining throughout the ship. Most importantly, they kept power flowing to Titanic's wireless radio. Those precious extra minutes allowed radio operators to continue sending desperate distress signals into the night. Without electricity, the lights would have gone dark. The radios would have gone silent. The rescue ship Carpathia might never have received the final calls for help in time. Every one of those engineers died. There are no dramatic photographs of them, no famous movie scenes. Yet historians believe their sacrifice helped save hundreds of lives. Sometimes, the greatest heroes are the ones history almost forgets. Among Titanic's first-class passengers was one of the wealthiest couples in America, Isidore Straus, co-owner of Macy's department store, and his wife, Ida. By the time the lifeboats were being loaded, Isidore had been offered a seat because of his age and status. He refused. He reportedly said he would not take a place while women and children were still waiting. So the officers turned to Ida. She could have boarded without him. Instead, she stepped back onto the deck. According to multiple survivor accounts, she said words that have echoed through history ever since. "We have lived together for many years. Where you go, I go." Some versions differ slightly, but every account tells the same story. She chose to stay with her husband. Ida even gave her fur coat to her maid and encouraged her to board a lifeboat instead. The maid survived. The Strausses did not. Passengers later reported seeing the elderly couple sitting quietly together on deck as the ship made its final plunge into the icy Atlantic. Whether every small detail is exactly as remembered has been debated by historians. But one fact has never been questioned. They chose not to be separated, even in the face of death. The first rays of sunlight revealed a scene almost impossible to imagine. By sunrise, the Titanic was gone. The orchestra had fallen silent. The engines had stopped forever. In its place, hundreds of tiny lifeboats floated across an endless icy ocean. Some were crowded with survivors. Others sat in complete silence. But among all the stories that emerged after that night, none was stranger than that of the ship's chief baker. His name was Charles Juggin. Unlike most passengers, Juggin didn't panic when he realized the ship was doomed. Instead, he continued doing his job. He organized his bakery staff, helped load bread onto the lifeboats so survivors would have something to eat. Then he helped women and children into the boats. Only after there was little left to do did he make his way toward the stern of the ship. As the Titanic tilted higher and higher, Juggin reportedly took a drink from a bottle of liquor he had with him. Years later, this detail became legendary. Many people began claiming that alcohol had somehow saved his life. As the stern rose into the air, Juggin simply rowed the ship downward. When the Titanic finally disappeared beneath the ocean, he entered the freezing Atlantic. The water temperature was around -2 degrees Celsius, cold enough to kill most people within minutes. Yet somehow, Charles Juggin remained alive. For nearly 2 hours, he floated in the darkness before finally climbing onto an overturned collapsible lifeboat. Against every expectation, he survived. His story spread around the world. Many believed alcohol had protected him from the freezing water. Modern medical experts, however, tell a different story. Alcohol actually causes blood vessels near the skin to widen. It makes people feel warmer, while causing them to lose body heat even faster. In reality, alcohol should have made his chances worse, not better. So why did he survive? Historians believe several factors worked together. He entered the water gradually instead of being trapped beneath the ship. He stayed remarkably calm. He kept moving instead of exhausting himself with panic. And perhaps most importantly, he was incredibly lucky. Sometimes, history doesn't have a perfect explanation. Sometimes, one person simply beats impossible odds. Charles Jourdan became one of the Titanic's greatest miracles, but he wasn't the only extraordinary survivor. Another passenger would go on to survive not just one maritime disaster, but three. Her name was Violet Jessop. She worked as a stewardess for the White Star Line. In 1911, she was aboard Titanic's sister ship Olympic when it collided with a British warship. She survived. A year later, she was assigned to the Titanic. When the ship began sinking, she helped passengers board lifeboats before eventually escaping herself. Most people would never set foot on another ocean liner again. Violet did exactly the opposite. During the First World War, she served aboard another sister ship, Britannic, in 1916. Britannic struck a mine in the Aegean Sea and began sinking. Once again, Violet escaped alive. 3 major maritime disasters, 3 survivals. Her unbelievable record earned her an unforgettable nickname, Miss Unsinkable. She lived until 1971 and spent decades telling people about the disasters she had witnessed. If Hollywood had invented her story, many people probably wouldn't have believed it. But perhaps the greatest mystery surrounding the Titanic wasn't about someone on the ship at all. It was about another ship, the SS Californian. On the night Titanic sank, the Californian had stopped because of heavy ice. Its crew could actually see lights on another ship in the distance. Later testimony suggested they even saw distress rockets being fired into the night sky. So why didn't they come? For more than a century, people have argued over that question. The Californian's only radio operator had gone to bed shortly before Titanic began sending its desperate distress calls. Without him awake, the messages were never received. As for the rockets, Captain Stanley Lord later claimed they didn't appear to be emergency signals. Others believed the crew simply failed to recognize the danger. Some historians even argue the ship they saw wasn't the Titanic at all, but another vessel positioned between them. The exact answer remains one of maritime history's greatest debates. One thing is certain. If the Californian had understood what was happening, hundreds more lives might have been saved. So why did so many people actually die that night? It wasn't because the ship struck the iceberg. It wasn't even because the ship sank. Most victims survived the sinking itself. What killed them was the ocean. The North Atlantic was around -2 degrees Celsius. Salt water freezes at a slightly lower temperature than fresh water, which meant the sea remained liquid even below the normal freezing point. Within minutes of entering the water, the body begins to lose heat at an astonishing rate. Hands stop working, muscles stiffen. Breathing becomes difficult. Many victims lost consciousness within 15 to 30 minutes. Others suffered cardiac arrest from the cold shock almost immediately. The tragedy wasn't simply drowning. It was hypothermia on a massive scale. The disaster shocked the entire world. People wanted answers. Governments launched investigations on both sides of the Atlantic. New safety rules followed almost immediately. Every passenger ship would now be required to carry enough lifeboats for everyone on board. Radio rooms would have to operate around the clock. Ice patrols would begin monitoring dangerous iceberg routes across the North Atlantic. Many of the international maritime safety rules still used today exist because of the Titanic. In a strange way, the disaster saved countless future lives. Yet even after the investigations ended, one question remained. Where was Titanic? The ship had vanished nearly 4 kilometers beneath one of the deepest and most hostile parts of the Atlantic Ocean. For more than 70 years, no one could find it. Many believed it might never be found at all. Then, in 1985, an American oceanographer named Robert Ballard finally solved the mystery. But even that discovery came with an unexpected twist. For years, Ballard had wanted to search for Titanic. The opportunity finally came with funding from the U.S. Navy. Officially, he was exploring the Atlantic Ocean. Unofficially, his primary mission was classified. Before searching for Titanic, Ballard secretly used his deep-sea technology to inspect 2 sunken American nuclear submarines, USS Thresher and USS Scorpion, both lost during the Cold War. Only after completing that mission did he receive permission to spend the remaining time searching for Titanic. Following a trail of debris scattered across the seafloor, his team finally found her. The ship wasn't resting in one piece. She had broken in half exactly as survivor accounts had suggested decades earlier. For the first time since 1912, human eyes looked upon the Titanic once again. More than 70 years after disappearing beneath the ocean, she had finally been found. Today, the wreck lies nearly 3,800 meters below the surface. Slowly, bacteria are consuming the steel. Scientists believe that one day, the ship itself may completely disappear. But its story never will, because the Titanic was never remembered simply because a ship sank. Ships have sunk throughout history. The Titanic became unforgettable because of the people. 8 musicians who chose to play until the very end. Engineers who kept the lights burning so strangers could escape. A husband and wife who refused to be separated. A baker who somehow survived the impossible. A stewardess who cheated death 3 different times. And mysteries that historians are still trying to solve more than a century later. The Titanic reminds us that history isn't only shaped by disasters. It's shaped by the choices people make when disaster arrives. And perhaps that's why, more than 100 years later, the world still can't stop telling its story. Thanks for watching Enigma Files. If you enjoyed uncovering the real stories behind one of history's greatest disasters, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment down below your thoughts about the story. Until next time.